Thought I told you not to run them other cuts on my UHD. My UHD became mine when we signed that licensing agreement. He's right. I'm paying you off when we get back, and I'm breaking that goddamn agreement. I don't allow the law would agree to that. What law is that? The video law? Shit. Goddamn video law is ruining the format. Ain't you still a part of that video law? There's something wrong with that fold-out booklet. I believe they elected you and paid you good wages for killing the preview cuts, huh? You rotten son of a bitch. There's cuts across the river, aiming at ya. Studio man on your trail, he'd like to catch ya. Boutique labels too, they'd like to get ya. Billy, they don't like you to be uncut free. Camping out all night with the new box set, dealing just till dawn in the bedroom. Just the recuts only they'd like to send ya. Billy, don't you turn your back on the preview cuts. Laying around with some sweet 4K master into a dark HDR. She will lead ya in some lonesome bad cuts. She will greet ya. Billy, you're so far away from the preview cuts. They say that this critic Seydor's got your number, so sleep with one eye open when you're transferred. Every little change just might be thunder. Thunder from the render of his edit. There's always some new stranger sneaking new cuts. Some keyboard happy fool willing to make edits. And some video label from hell to make it supplanted. Supplanting your edit and your soul. The businessmen from MGM and Warner want you to go down. They've hired Criterion to force a showdown. Billy, don't it make you feel so low down to be cut down by the label who was film's friend? We did have some times, didn't we? It's got to be pretty hard to turn your back on all that, huh? You want it straight, if that's what you're here for. The rights holders want you gone, out of the video release. But are they telling me, or are they asking me? I'm asking you. But on the Blu-ray UHD combo release, I'm making you. Because I might take over physical media releases of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Old Criterion, Sheriff Criterion, sold out to the critics Warner and MGM. How does it feel? It feels like times have changed. Times, maybe. Not the preview cuts. Hello and welcome back to this damn fully realistic crusade. In this video, I'll be reviewing the Criterion 4K UHD and Blu-ray combo format release of Sam Peckinpah's 1973 masterpiece, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which exists in a variety of versions, all stemming from the fact that Peckinpah really never got to finish the film, as it was a very contentious production with the studio behind it, MGM, and in particular, James Aubrey as head of the studio, who seems to have had a vendetta against the production. So the actual shooting of the film itself was extraordinarily tense, as the entire crew was off in Durango, Mexico, essentially off on their own, trying to make an unbelievably deep and thoughtful film that was not the sort of shoot-'em-up western that MGM thought they were getting, as they hired Sam Peckinpah after his success with The Wild Bunch and making a sort of notorious name for himself in the industry, really stemming from people who didn't understand the meaning of The Wild Bunch and thought it was about nothing but the glorification of violence, which it was anything but. Pat Garrett expands upon all themes that you find in previous Peckinpah films, but to such a great degree that I think it is really more of an alcohol-fueled tone poem about death and the meaninglessness of the human condition. It is without question one of, if not arguably, the saddest and most somber and most brutally honest film ever released by a Hollywood studio. So, of course, it was not released in the intended version, nor was the technical intended version ever truly finished. The 1973 theatrical cut made a variety of edits that cheapened the film and watered it down, although it is better than you would think it is because the original editors, mostly Roger Spottiswoode, had to try and fight to keep as much of Peckinpah's vision in the film as they could, but also they were stuck between a rock and a hard place, and Peckinpah had basically removed himself from the equation and had also kind of just made himself persona non grata with all the people at MGM. Again, chiefly the vengeful idiocy of the smiling cobra James Aubrey, who ruined many films during his tenure at MGM. So for years, all we had was the theatrical cut, and that's what made it to the initial home video releases. This meant that the film's reputation was never all that great, and most critics seem to have had no idea about the behind-the-scenes troubles that affected the film. Most of the focus was, of course, given to Bob Dylan actually being an actor in the film, but mostly his iconic soundtrack, which produced the landmark classic Knockin' on Heaven's Door. It is a brilliant soundtrack that perfectly complements the sort of non-traditional, almost shambling way the narrative goes along, as it is a film where you know the outcome from the opening when you see it in the proper preview version, either one of the two preview versions, but also it's a film where you know the outcome from the start, as you know that Pat Garrett is merely there to kill Billy the Kid, even if they were friends, and he's going to do it regardless, and he's going to do it even though it's really killing himself in a way. And he knows this, and the audience knows this from the opening of the film, even in the bastardized theatrical cut. So it's a film that is unbelievably fatalistic, and the score manages to find even the tiny moments of bursts of levity or lightness or elements of humor that creep into, again, what is really one of the most unrepentingly dark, somber, and brutally honest films to ever be released by a Hollywood studio. And this is even in the compromised theatrical version. So its rediscovery really happened in the mid to late 1980s when the first of the preview cut versions that was supervised by Sam Peckinpah himself was shown on the Z channel in Los Angeles, and eventually this was worked on by the Turner people who were running the MGM UA library, and that resulted in the video release on Laserdisc and VHS of what is known as the first preview version, or specifically in video terms, the 1988 Turner preview version, because it was a Turner Video Master released by MGM UA, who controlled the Warner library as well at that time. So this is where the film really had its reputation turn around. This was the first time you could see the film of course, in widescreen on home video when you're watching the Laserdisc edition, but it was the first time you could see the film as Peckinpah intended it, with what I think is one of the greatest openings in cinematic history, which uses all of Peckinpah's techniques that he had on The Wild Bunch, playing around with the passage of time, mixing slow motion in with standard motion in terms of the frame speed, and beautifully utilizing the themes that will play out for the rest of the film by showing the death of Pat Garrett at the start of the film. It is an unbelievably striking opening, and most of us who, of course, didn't get to see this on the original release and became Peckinpah fans growing up in the 80s and 90s, this was the first version we saw. This was the version that blew our minds from that opening onwards. It is not a fully restored version. It does have damage throughout and is seemingly coming right from that preview print element that thankfully survives, so it's got cue changeovers and damage and everything, but it transferred pretty darn well, although there is one quibble that since it doesn't include a particular scene that is in other versions and was in the theatrical cut, it's the scene with Garrett visiting his wife at home. It's a pivotal character moment, but it is not in the Turner preview or first preview version, as it's more correctly called. So it's questioned if that's actually supposed to be there and was just somehow left out of the Turner master and then just got stuck that way. That's the only issue with the first preview version or the Turner preview preview version. And this became the new de facto standard edition of the film up until the 2005 DVD release. So the theatrical cut that had existed in pan and scan on VHS and beta and television airings quickly disappeared, so that became the rare version. And the only way you could get that is on the original VHS release that I have here in the original 1980s MGM UA big box VHS edition. In 2005, Warner finally revisited the film because they now had the MGM library, of course, and they did it as part of a Peckinpah refresh for a DVD box set of the Legendary Westerns collection. This did get, thankfully, a 2-disc special edition treatment, but the Turner preview version was basically taken from the pre-existing old Laserdisc era master and placed on disc 2 with slightly spiffed up video quality because it was DVD as a supplemental feature, essentially. And it now had a lossy mono version of the Laserdisc mono track that had some noise reduction applied to it. So it was a slightly better picture presentation, but otherwise the same master with slightly worse audio version of what we had on the Laserdisc. It was not cleaned up or really addressed in any way outside of a little bit of light massaging here and there. And it was relegated to being essentially a bonus feature because Warner Brothers did actually fund a very quickly made 2005 reconstruction edit headed by Paul Seydor, and also some other Peckinpah scholars were involved in order to try and make essentially a compromise version. The idea being that it would have been maybe what Peckinpah would have made had he been able to finish the editing process without interference, and there hadn't been all the bad blood between him and MGM. And it essentially combines elements of the preview version and the theatrical cut, which Seydor very much prefers and makes his opinions very much known throughout all of the interviews and commentaries. And this will come back when we talk about the new 50th anniversary version. So this is a cut of the film that was released in 2005, so it's known as the 2005 cut or the Seydor cut, but it's really the 2005 reconstruction. It was not done with a large budget, and the process seems to have been very rushed, so the overall technical specs are not the greatest. There is a new sound remix that does have a number of errors and some new effects that don't sound all that great, and the color timing is also very suspect, and I've never been a fan of the overall presentation of this, and it was indeed very much rushed through to simply be a video release. It is not a full-scale restoration given the proper time to be done archivally. Plus, it's also a particular critic's interpretation of the film and following their own opinions from the research they've done over the years and the books they've written. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, and it was not intended to become the new de facto definitive version of the film in print, but Warner Brothers took the shorthand of doing that and making it disc 1 on this release and making it the version that was shown everywhere and in circulation, and relegating what we had of the director's cut in the first preview version or the Turner Master to a bonus disc presentation with a not so good port of the old Laserdisc Master. This DVD release did have a number of new extras made for it, which is surprising because Warner didn't always do that, and it had a new commentary track made for each version of the film, so it has 2 commentaries. And so this release is still extremely important for all the supplemental features, but most of all for the component video DVD presentation of the 1988 Turner preview version of the first preview cut, because unfortunately that is still the best quality we have in picture for the first preview cut of the film, and the best audio of that is still on the Laserdisc release. Another issue with the Warner 2005 DVD is unfortunately it suffers the dreaded Warner DVD disc rot problem. So when I went back to my copies of the film to reference in preparation for this review, I unfortunately found that both of the discs in my set, which I had as part of the Peckinpah box set, which I bought back when it was new, and I was a broke teenager and already obsessed with this film. I found that the discs were rotted and would not play through completely, nor would the extras work. And this release is still really important because all of the extras are unique and have not been ported to the Criterion release, and most of all, it's our best option for picture in terms of the proper first preview version of the film. So thankfully, a friend of this channel, Jack Lugo, sent me his spare copy that he was up upgrading, so I had to get a second copy of the release, and this is actually the standalone version made a little bit later, and this is what you have to do to usually avoid the Warner DVD disc rot problem. If you're not aware of this phenomena, I've made a variety of videos about it, trying to detail the overall issue and compile a list of titles, which unfortunately some of the Peckinpah DVD releases are part of, and worst of all is that Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is the one release that's the most important for having the 1988 master of the film in slightly better picture quality and having 2 exclusive commentaries and a host of exclusive extras that make this DVD one you still have to hang on to. And unfortunately, you need to go and check your copies, because if you're like me and you had specifically the box set version, it's going to be rotted by now and your disc won't work. So you have to track down another copy and hope you can find one that isn't rotted. Again, thanks to Jack Lugo for sending me his copy he was parting out. Unfortunately, the film stayed in the 2005 cut as being the new primary version of the film all this time up until the new Criterion release. It was rumored for a long while that Warner might do something with the film eventually, and then it was rumored that Criterion had picked up the rights and was doing their usual we'll get rights to an iconic film and just kind of sit on it for a few years until we get around to it. That could never be proven or debunked until eventually Criterion did announce and release this film this year in a deluxe package with multiple cuts of the film, which got all of us fans excited. There has been a lot of building resentment against the 2005 cut since its release, as myself and most Peckinpah fans can't stand the edits and decisions that were made in order to favor the theatrical cut of the film. And also the bad color timing and the bad sound mix and the fact that it was standard definition only and done as a video project, and Warner treated it like it was a director's cut of the film, which it certainly is not, nor is it anywhere near the impact of the original preview versions that survive, specifically the first preview version that we had on the Turner Master and had watched for all these years. But again, to be fair, the 2005 cut was not intended to become the new standard version of the film. It was designed as an alternative what-if compilation of the different cuts, so that should be stressed, and Warner didn't help them out by giving them a tiny budget and really rushing them through the process. So it was very compromised, and it certainly needed to be redone, but really the whole film needed a proper restoration, and that includes all versions of the film: the theatrical version, the first preview version, the second preview version, which has some slight differences, including entirely different end credits, and is actually missing some of the footage from the first preview version, but does have the scene with Garrett and his wife that's in all the other cuts of the film. And this version was never released before this point. And this is the version that Peckinpah and the crew and cohorts and various people managed to spirit out of MGM and hide in Peckinpah's garage for a number of years under an alternate title, which for my money is one of the great anecdotes of Hollywood history, that one of Sam Peckinpah's greatest works was essentially saved because he and his buddies literally stole the film canisters out of MGM from under their nose and, fearful of retribution, hid it in his garage under different names. But this also meant that the rather frankly screwy 2005 cut could be revisited and be, at the very least, finally polished, and a proper reconstruction version under Seydor's vision could be fully realized and basically do what should have been done in 2005 had Warner actually, cared about things. So now Criterion has entered into the world of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, the myriad of versions, the long story filled with crazy anecdotes about the intensively difficult production, the battle between Peckinpah, the crew, and MGM, and the different versions of the film and how the cutting process went, plus the sort of tumultuous history of the film just on home video and how the different cuts have been handled in different masterings over the years, and then the 2005 cut that was made that is merely a particular critic's opinion of how the film could have been finished, and that was not able to be finished properly and fully polished in terms of the overall presentation and sound mix. So there's a lot of ground to cover, and this is a release that is going to demand multiple discs. So thankfully, Criterion did decide to go the route of having a multi-disc set with 4K UHDs and Blu-rays as well. So it's a dual format release containing most of the cuts on both formats. But the reason why I explained at least a Cliff Notes version of the different cuts of the film and some of the backstory and history is because to say I have gigantic problems with this release is an understatement. The way Criterion has approached this not only has continued the problems that Warner had on the DVD release by promoting the critics re-edit, the 2005 cut, as the director's cut or definitive version of the film and making that the one in circulation that everybody references to, but they've really doubled down on this because they repeated exactly what Warner did, disrespected what we have surviving of Peckinpah's vision in terms of what they did with only one of the two preview cuts, essentially treating it as a bonus supplemental feature once again. But they also have funded a new version of Seydor's 2005 cut, which is now the 50th anniversary cut edition, which has been fully restored and is in 4K on the UHD with Dolby Vision grading as disc 1 of this new release, thus giving it prominence and now essentially acting as if this is the new standard version of the film, and this is going to be the version that is going to turn up in print everywhere and on streaming services as well. So basically repeating the same mistakes Warner made with the 2005 special edition DVD release. But to add insult to injury, they nicely did actually also restore the theatrical cut of the film. And that has been done with a 4K restoration, obviously from the same files for the 50th anniversary version. They seem to have gone back to the original negative, scanned that at 4K, and then conformed it to, obviously, you have the original theatrical cut that you've scanned and restored, and then you re-edit that to then recreate the edits of the 2005 cut that Seydor made, but make further tweaks and additions, because this 50th anniversary cut is essentially version 2 of the 2005 cut. That is more polished, has a better sound presentation, and doesn't have all the errors and defects of the 2005 cut, and also has the input, at least to some degree, of original editor Roger Spottiswoode, and that, for my money, is the only reason why anybody should pay any attention to this new 50th anniversary cut. It is thankfully better and addresses a lot of the problems of the 2005 cut, but essentially it recreates everything else the 2005 cut did, all of which I disagree with because the mentality, while it is sound, is basing all of its decisions on the person in charge preferring the edits of the theatrical cut and trying to think what the Sam Peckinpah of The Wild Bunch would have done with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. These two films are not the same, nor was Sam Peckinpah in the same headspace in making the two films. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is purposefully challenging and different and explicitly made to not be The Wild Bunch, to be different in a sort of challenging the audience way, and especially challenging what the studio thought they were going to get when they just thought they were going to get Bloody Sam Goes to Mexico. So that's always been my problem with the 2005 cut of the film and why I think it's actually destructive in a lot of ways. And that has been essentially recreated in this 50th anniversary cut. So while thankfully it fixes the issues of the 2005 version in terms of the technical problems and doesn't have the color grading issues, I have extreme problems with that version and in either form and refuse to ever watch them. I've seen them once each all the way through. I have no desire to ever sit through them again, nor do I think they are really the film as it was completed in the preview cuts. The preview cuts really are the film, warts and all, and needed to be properly restored. But with Criterion also restoring the MGM theatrical cut, which is the furthest from Peckinpah's original vision, with some frankly, truly gross additions, particularly the change made to the end credits is the most egregious and the one that James Aubrey himself insisted upon. They have restored the theatrical cut in 4K, given it a UHD release of its own with Dolby Vision grading, and made that disc 2, And since most people are only going to look at the big primary new 4K masters and think that this is how the film is supposed to be, that's going to skew people's opinions who don't know the backstory and don't know anything about the editing history of the film and how important the preview versions are. And it basically pours salt in the wound, because essentially what Criterion has done here is not just double down on Warner's mistakes and essentially burying what is the actual surviving version of the director's cut, but they've also now essentially promoted the cut down, compromised MGM release edit of the film that came out in 1973 and given that its own restoration. So you have essentially two altered versions of the film. One with obviously very good intentions, I think misguided ones, but at least they are understandable. And again, that was also done, like the 2005 version, not to supplant the other versions of the film. It was done as a reconstruction in somebody's own sort of view of the film. It was not meant to be disc one of a set and become the standard version in print. But in restoring MGM's theatrical edit, you've essentially doubled down on what MGM did in 1973 to harm the film and Peckinpah's reputation. And you've repeated the actions of both Warner and MGM and insulted the work once again. And if that wasn't bad enough, while we do have a version of the preview cuts, and it is the previously unreleased to fans second preview version, this has been relegated to just a standard Blu-ray disc in terms of the extra discs in the set. And also, it is merely a raw 2K scan of the surviving second preview version film element held in an archive. It has not been color corrected, it has not been given any major restoration work, it has damage throughout, it has color fluctuations, it has changeover cues, of course, baked in, and it's amazing the quality is as good as it is. And thank God the disc encoding is good, because it's a Blu-ray and a Criterion release, so I was expecting to run into my usual problems with their terrible Blu-ray encoding. And since, for my money, this is the only disc of merit in the entire set, because it's the only presentation of Peckinpah's vision of the film in some form, this is the only disc that anybody should care about. So that just boggles my mind. And the mentality on this release, and also in some of Criterion's statements and reading the tech specs about the actual transfers in the booklet, everyone seems to have acted like the preview cut was just being included for completion's sake, and that they did a basic scan of it, and that was all they had to do, and they just put it on a Blu-ray. There is no inclusion whatsoever of the first preview version of the film, nor is there even an inclusion of the 1988 Turner Master version, even if it was just in standard definition. There's been no real answer as to why Criterion did this, and it's also a real head-scratcher because, as I mentioned, the first preview cut has exclusive footage that was not in or removed from the second preview version. So while the two preview cuts are almost exactly the same, and most people would actually think they're the same, they're actually different. So you have to have both of them, or you have to make a third version that has all the elements of both preview cuts. But then you run into the issue of the second preview version having different end credits, and those are a bit of a head scratcher in and of themselves, because they conclude with essentially a note from Sam Peckinpah talking about fighting back against the powers that be, even in the 1970s as well. So it's a sort of breaking the fourth wall moment. So there should have been a presentation of both preview cuts without question, because they have unique footage, they are edited differently, and they are two distinct cuts. They are the only versions of the film that Peckinpah was involved in and actually made. They only exist in raw and rough states. It has been theorized that perhaps the first preview version has deteriorated beyond use, or Warner, for some reason, would not allow Criterion to access the materials of the first preview version, or even the materials for the Turner Master for the DVD and the Laserdisc Master originally. Again, this is all just everyone trying to guess, because this has not been explicitly stated. Honestly, I think it might have been simply that Criterion simply didn't feel there was a need to bother with the first preview version, which is baffling because it is a completely unique edit and was the version in circulation basically from 1988 to 2005, and is most fans, myself included, preferred version of what we have surviving of Peckinpah's vision for the film. In any case, whichever version of the preview cuts you would have included in this release, the 4K master that had been made first of the theatrical cut and then for the recut 50th anniversary edition should have been used to reconstruct both of the preview cuts and present those on UHDs with Dolby Vision grading as well, plus new transfers of the surviving original mono mix of the preview cuts. Now, there are unique elements that are seemingly not obviously part of the theatrical cut negative, so those have to be sourced from prints and probably rough as is prints. So you would have to drop down in quality for, say, the title sequence and having the iconic opening of the preview cuts, which is one of Sam Peckinpah's absolute masterful moments in the cinematic medium and should have never been removed from the film. And anybody who says different, I simply don't understand your logic because it's broken. Although in defense of the theatrical cut, it seems that the loss of the opening was a sort of giving MGM a win because Peckinpah and the editors and everyone wanted to fight so hard to retain what is probably the most famous scene in the film, which is when Pat Garrett is by the riverbank and he and a floating boat going down the river with a family on it exchange essentially friendly gunfire at one another. There's absolutely no dialogue, and of course, that meant that James Aubrey and MGM couldn't stand the scene, didn't understand it, and wanted it removed, and so essentially the sacrifice seems to have been the original opening that you only see in the preview cut. But in any case, there should have been a UHD disc, disc 1, that was taking the new 4K scan Dolby Vision master and recreating both of the preview cuts. And since they are almost identical with some slight differences, those cuts should have been branched. So you would have had two versions branched on the same disc. And since that is all we have representing Sam Peckinpah's vision of the film, the only cuts he was involved with, that should have been made disc 1. The film is famously unfinished. It exists in a variety of releases and editions and cuts and edits and has a tumultuous history. So putting that out there front and center for people to come to for the first time who've never seen the film before, which you should watch the preview cuts first if you've never seen the film before, because that is the film. Everything else is secondary. You shouldn't have essentially worried about putting out a as-is reconstruction of the preview cuts, spiffed up as best as you could in an otherwise 4K master, and essentially putting people off who think, oh, this is a bad transfer, or I don't want to watch something that has low quality bits. All you have to do is have a little bit of explanatory text, or better yet, make some new extras about the versions, comparing them and explaining to people why the preview cuts are important. And if anything was the so-called director's cut, it's the preview cuts, because that's the only thing the director was actually involved with and made. Don't relegate a raw scan of the second preview cut complete with damage and color fluctuation and color timing issues without any major restoration work as essentially a secondary Blu-ray disc and only a 1080p SDR transfer, sharing the disc with other supplements like it's just tacked on as a bonus. If you're going to restore Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, you have to restore not just one, but both of the preview versions, because that is the film. That's the film that Peckinpah made, even if it was unfinished and he might have changed things later, or if things had gone differently. From what we have, those two preview cuts are the film. You have to restore those. To restore the film and come out with a 4K master and not restore either of the preview cuts and only include one of them as a raw scan only done at 2K from a worn element with problems, I don't know what you're doing. I mean, this is just, it's not only baffling, it's infuriating, and it really pours salt in the wound for all of us Peckinpah fans who have been decrying how the actual preview version has been buried by home video practices and made secondary to the 2005 cut. But now the new version 2.0 of essentially a fan edit, because when you actually dig into what the 2005 cut and 50th anniversary cut are, I mean, they're a fan edit, really, at the end of the day. Seydor is one of the big Peckinpah critics and has written books on Peckinpah and is a Peckinpah authority and made his version with the best of intentions. I can totally respect that. I don't agree with any of it, but it's also somebody else's vision of what they think somebody would have done. It's not like they're going back and reconstructing a film to match a continuity script or a shooting script, or they have reference materials. They are making decisions based on their own personal preference, which they have stated clearly time and time again for years is for the bastardized theatrical cut of the film. And they actually say that they dislike, in fact, extremely dislike the preview versions of the film. So, again, it's essentially a fan edit with the best intentions and now really well polished with a beautiful, new 4K master and new transfer of the mono mix and things. But it's a fan edit. It's a version 2.0 of a fan edit. That's exactly what it is. I am beyond thrilled that Criterion even thought to include the theatrical version, let alone restore it. But they technically kind of had to, because in scanning the negative, it seems to have obviously been conformed to the theatrical cut. So to restore the film, you're technically restoring the theatrical cut first. The work is then reconstructing the preview versions from the new restoration of the theatrical cut you made, getting the footage from those elements, obviously having a quality drop when you go to the elements that are not in the theatrical cut at all, and then using all of that stuff to then make the polished version 2.0 of the Seydor version originally done for the DVD. If that had been done, and that's what we frankly expect from somebody like Criterion, because that's what anybody doing a restoration of this film should have done for a complete archival presentation, to handle the film properly and, actually restore either of the two versions the director made instead of just treating them like, frankly, garbage. But they have essentially disrespected the film in doing this. They've not only given preference, but they have actually given top-of-the-line treatment to the severely compromised theatrical release version and essentially vindicated the vengeful idiocy of James Aubrey and MGM in 1973 for trying to destroy Peckinpah's film, although, again, the editors were trying tooth and nail to save as much as they could. But they've also given the greatest precedence to a second version of a fan edit. Because, again, when you look at the versions that Seydor has made, and again, I don't mind that he was behind these, and I don't mind the idea that a critic comes in and tries to make a reconstruction from their best educated opinion. But again, it's their own opinion. It's not how the film is actually finished in any form. It's their own thoughts and opinions, all of which I vehemently disagree with, including the fact that they cut the most important line in the entire film that, for whatever reason, they just hate and they just don't like. They don't like the line reading. They don't like the line itself. And so that's just out. And so now when people come to this, they're usually going to be looking at the 50th anniversary reconstruction version, because you'd think that that was the film restored as best as it could be and wasn't actually a particular critic's opinionated cut of a film. You won't actually get the most crucial line of the entire film because, it's a fan edit. It's a revised fan edit. It's a version 2.0 of a pre-existing fan edit that all of us Peckinpah nerds had gigantic issues with it. Most of us can't stand the Seydor versions. And Seydor's gotten a lot of criticism, and frankly, a lot of it's deserved. Some of it has gotten far too nasty over the years, which is unfortunate. But part of that is not Seydor's fault. It's the fault of Warner for trying to act like the 2005 version was a new director's cut of the film and is the definitive version of the film that's going to be shown everywhere and in circulation. So again, a lot of that ire should have also been directed at Warner. But that's nothing compared to what Criterion has done, because they've doubled down on not just what Warner did, but what MGM did in trying to destroy and sabotage the film in 1973. So they have vindicated James Aubrey here. They have vindicated the smiling cobra of MGM, who destroyed countless films and was one of the worst studio chiefs in all of film history. So I really don't understand why this happened. I think this is the single greatest, not just mistake, oversight, flaw. This is the single greatest problem that Criterion has ever had on a release, and it was completely avoidable. This is simply, from all that I can tell, because it's not like people will actually answer our questions or explain things fully in a booklet. From all I can tell, this is simply because they didn't want to do the work of actually restoring and reconstructing the preview versions. Other labels do this all the time with new 4K masters of theatrical cuts. And even for the most out there genre films you've never heard of in your life, Arrow Video will do this on all kinds of genre titles. And of course, their Bruce Lee box set, they tried to recreate multiple different cuts that they had to do by hand, sourcing from all kinds of different iterations of the film, sometimes of lower quality, and had to manually recreate the edits and essentially use their new master as a base. It is doable. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience. But now, essentially, us fans have to do that. So that's what I'm going to do with this 4K master. I now have to take the new restored 50th anniversary 4K master and the 4K master of the theatrical cut and try to cobble together my own edit, reconstructing both the first and second preview cuts, and then having to jump over to the degraded scan, basic as is, warts and all scan of the second preview cut on the Blu-ray in 1080p SDR for recreating the second preview cut, and then for the unique materials and the frankly, with less color timing issues, but lower quality because of standard definition materials exclusive to the first preview version or the Turner preview version. So fans have to now recreate and do their own fan edit, well, really a fan reconstruction and fan restoration of the actual proper versions of the film that Peckinpah made, either in the first or second preview cuts. I really don't know why Criterion thought this was a good idea. For a label that is the most famous of boutique labels, that prides itself on respecting directors' visions, well, you sure as hell didn't do that here. In fact, you insulted the director's vision in several different ways, and it's a treasure getting any version of the second preview cut, even if it's a raw print scan. But the fact that it's been treated as just a secondary, a bonus option, essentially, not worked on at all, and there is no form of either preview cut on the UHDs or the 4K masters when they should have been reconstructed, even if it had to jump down to low-quality print scan elements for the specific scenes. That's just insulting. It's insulting to Peckinpah fans. It's insulting to the film most of all, and of course, the director's vision, which you claim to want to respect in every release. Again, you sure as hell didn't here, and it has been made unbelievably clear that the director's vision is apparently not important in regards to this release, which has 4 discs and still couldn't be bothered to properly restore either of the preview cuts, which, again, other labels would have done. To talk a little bit about the transfers, the 4K masters, and of course, the freaking raw print scan of the second preview version, I'll read some from the transfer notes, and this will explain some of what I've been talking about and how Criterion basically didn't do a full restoration of the film because they needed to go from this point and then reconstruct the 2 preview cuts of the film using their new 4K master as a base. Supervised and approved by editor and author Paul Seydor and the co-editor and colorist Roger Spottiswoode, the new 4K master was created from the 35mm original negative and a 35mm color reversal intermediate. Stupid fold-out booklet making everything hard. Of course, you make the text small, so it's hard to read. The original mono soundtrack was remastered from the 2-inch dialogue, music, and effects magnetic track. This cut represents a continuation of work begun by Seydor for the special edition on DVD from Warner in 2005. That version restored most of the scenes removed for the theatrical release and featured additional tightening of the editing. The 50th anniversary release corrects the earlier version's color grading, which was defended for years, as we all said how bad it was. And so now to actually get that confirmed that it was defective is at least some small victory for us Peckinpah fans who despise the 2005 cut, and corrects the sound mix of the 2005 cut, which was filled with errors and problems that we all complained about and hated. So again, the new 50th anniversary version is basically the corrected proper version 2.0 of the 2005 fan edit. Or to be fair, I would guess it should be technically called the educated critic and some original crew involvement fan edit. This new 50th anniversary cut also includes, quote, further changes we felt were necessary in order to come closer to what Peckinpah himself wanted, quote. Again, don't know what source they had for that to know what Peckinpah wanted. But, you know, you can say stuff like that, and I guess it sounds nice in a booklet. These include the reinstatement of the scene in the script called Tuckerman's Hotel, and a few lines of additional dialogue in other scenes. The only scene the anniversary release does not retain from the 2005 version is the prostitute's montage. This montage is believed that Peckinpah himself would have probably removed it had he actually continued working on the film, and it is seen in the second preview version. That's the raw scan on the bonus Blu-ray. Again, an educated guess, one that they're probably right about, but again, it's an educated guess that they made. Then for the theatrical cut, this new 4K master was created from the original negative. The original mono soundtrack was remastered from the 35mm dialogue music effects magnetic track. After Peckinpah stopped working on the film, the editors had to take charge, reluctantly removing scenes to bring the film down to the studio's desired length, while nonetheless hewing as closely as possible to Peckinpah's vision. The cut of the film that resulted, released in theaters in 1973, is available here for the first time since its release on VHS, which I have here, and they are correct. So that is a major victory for preserving the history of the film. Unfortunately, it's the only victory in terms of having anything presentable for an earlier version of the film. Now, the second preview cut, or what's termed as the final preview cut in this release. The final preview cut represents the last version of the film on which Peckinpah worked directly. This new 2K master was created from a 35mm print from the collection of the Academy Film Archive. The original mono soundtrack was remastered from the magnetic track. 2 preview cuts of Pat Garrett were shown within days of each other in May 1973, and the final preview cut, released here for the first time, represents the second of those. Both preview versions were works in progress, with scenes missing and color grading and sound mixing incomplete, but the second one includes material missing from the first, and an endnote authored and initialed by Peckinpah. Quote, following the second preview, MGM for commercial reasons demanded that the film be shortened considerably. Quote, according to Seydor and Spottiswoode. Quote, Peckinpah refused to cooperate or participate in any further editing, though contrary to rumor, he was never fired, never barred from the lot or the cutting room, and never prevented from continuing to work on the film he had chosen to. End quote. Unrestored and minimally color-corrected, this presentation is intended to convey the feeling of watching the raw, rough-edged, and unfinished film. So there was a tiny bit of light massaging, but this is essentially what you should expect from a fan scan of a 35mm print that's floating around online that's had maybe a tiny bit of work done on the audio and a tiny bit of overall color correction, but not a shot-by-shot color regrading. I have no words. I mean, you get more nowadays from fans doing a grindhouse scan of a 35mm release print of a film and trying to make it as good as they can than Criterion did with the one surviving copy of the second preview version of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, when they have a perfectly good new 4K master that they could have used as a base and then cut to the specific second preview cut scenes if they were only going to include a version of one preview cut. And then they should have included the raw 2K master scan directly as a supplemental. Then we wouldn't have an issue with how they handled the second preview cut. But apparently, that was too much work for people. All 3 versions of the film are presented in the aspect ratio of 2.35:1. The 50th anniversary restoration and original theatrical release are presented in Dolby Vision HDR on the 4K UHD disc and high definition SDR on the Blu-rays. The final preview cut is presented in high definition SDR. They should have added, and we really don't give a crap about this version and are just treating it as a tacked on, hey, isn't it cool? It's like you went to an art house and saw a raw print, man. So to talk about the picture quality of the only disc that matters, which is the Blu-ray of the second preview version or final preview version, this is a raw 2K scan with some slight basic color adjustments and some light work on the audio, which is mostly unnecessary noise reduction. It's basically a raw scan, for the most part, of the one print that is held at the Academy Film Archive. This second preview version is very similar to the first preview version or the Turner Master we're used to on video, but it does include some scenes not in the first preview version, but the first preview version contains footage that is not in the second preview version, so not having any version of the first preview version is a major blunder. Also, the second preview version has completely different end credits with the frankly rather bizarre note from Peckinpah that is endearing in one way and really strange in another, so it's very likely that that would have not ever been released and we would have had the more traditional credits and the first preview version. So when you watch through this disc, again, thankfully the encoding is good with a very high bit rate, so thank God there's no major encoding issues which plague most Criterion Blu-rays. This is essentially as close as you get to a raw print scan. If I was looking at this and I knew that it was a fan scan of a raw print that they had gotten scanned and done the best they could with, I would understand that. That's what this looks like. That's what this plays like. This looks like you were able to see this incredibly rare single print of the second preview version projected at an art house theater that had really good 35mm projection. That's the sort of experience you get. And on one hand, it's kind of cool to see it in that way. Obviously, the warts and all, this is exactly how it is version, but with this being the only representation of the director's vision of the film, it's insulting to the film and the director's work to have this be the only representation and it being made secondary to the big, shiny, new, spiffy 4K masters of the recut of the 2005 cut and the bastardized theatrical release version. This presentation is, of course, filled with damage, which runs the gamut from noise in the audio, which also sounds a bit thin because they're directly transferring the mono source. There's emulsion scratches. There's flashes in the cuts because this was also a preview version. It wasn't a finalized version, so it's got rough spots throughout. There's marks all over scenes, particularly at the ends where they're literally having to pencil and mark in, and you've got the X's and all the different marks. There's, of course, changeover cues that appear every, roughly 20 minutes as they are actual reels being run through as it was essentially a rough second preview cut, and they just transferred this print as is. The color fluctuates wildly in places, and while there's never outright fading, there is frequent examples of the color not being where it should be, and also only seemingly the most slight of adjustments and an overall attempt to basically do a sort of basic balancing of the color. The grain structure varies wildly. There are moments of extreme wear in certain places. Some scenes outdoors are a bit bright, especially when the sun is in the background of the sky. There are bursts of audio noise throughout the track. There are lines and scratches in certain moments, some heavier than others, of course. There are some slight missing frames scattered throughout. There is sometimes a light strobing effect in certain scenes. And then you've got moments where certain scenes have color variation within individual scenes, and we basically go from one shot to another that's a completely different color temperature, and then we go back to the other, so there's variation even there. Again, we have the unique end credits with the Peckinpah note, but as the music is fading and we fade the credits to black, instead of letting the music play out fully, Criterion doesn't wait to put their end Criterion credit and information credit until the film is actually fully over, so it does ruin the sort of coda ending of the film as the music fades out over black. So that was a little bit annoying, of course, especially since this is not a restoration. This is basically, we did some basic work on a raw print scan and threw it on a Blu-ray disc. So that is your experience with the second preview version or the final preview version that's on this disc. It is as close as you can get to what you'd see in a fan print scan on an official release, especially for a Criterion release. And this is a great inclusion, but It should have been as an actual supplement to a 4K UHD with both preview cuts that were reconstructed using the new 4K master as the base source. And then you had to do the extra work of syncing the audio tracks of the preview versions and, reconstructing the film and actually doing a restoration process on the director's versions of the film. Both of them branched on the same disc as disc 1. This isn't rocket science, people. Then you switch over to the UHDs, which add insult to injury because you get to see the new 4K master with Dolby Vision grading. The 50th anniversary cut is now disc 1, and the 1973 MGM theatrical cut is disc 2. Both of them look fantastic. They have nice encodes for Criterion UHDs. The bitrate is pretty high. There's no major encoding issues or anything. The Dolby Vision HDR is very tasteful. The color timing is very solid and has none of the issues of the terrible 2005 cut color timing. And the overall difference in quality is, of course, staggering when you compare it to how we have to see the only presentation of one of the preview cuts on the disc, which is very near to a raw print scan of a surviving degraded lone work print element. So again, it pours salt in the wound, and the only way that you have to properly fix this issue is to take the 4K masters, put them in editing software, and use them to reconstruct the two preview cuts yourself. The UHDs and the Blu-rays of the same masters, because these two 4K masters are also presented in this release on the 1080p SDR Blu-rays. They are far better in quality, although I will say that the SDR Blu-ray versions of the new 4K masters are not as well encoded as they should be, but that's a typical Criterion thing. If you get a Blu-ray of theirs, you have to worry that the encoding is not going to be all that great. They're well done without any major problems, but the overall bitrate is lower than what I would like it to be, and ironically, the preview cut presentation is one of the better Criterion Blu-ray masterings I've seen in a long while, thank goodness. But even looking at the new 4K master versions in the SDR presentations, the quality is still so much better than how they've treated the preview cut that it really hurts. And you feel insulted once again, and you feel the film has been insulted once again. Again, I think the color timing is, of course, a vast improvement over the 2005 release. I don't know if I'm 100% sold on all of it, but since I'm used mostly to the preview cuts, which only exist in various not the greatest scans of worn work print elements, it's hard to have a frame of reference anyway. So I'm overall satisfied with the look and appearance of the new 4K master. I just think it's frankly criminal that Criterion did not reconstruct either of the two preview cuts using this new 4K master as a base source. Now, for the audio, we have lossless mono on all the versions of the film, and of course, they have not been fully left alone. In terms of the preview cut, it is raw audio for the most part from the source. It's full of noise and wear, but it does seem to have been given at least some basic declicking and noise reduction. Now, when I compare all of these to past releases, for fidelity, overall, I think the best release of the film's original mix is by far the MGM Laserdisc, the letterbox edition of the first preview cut or the Turner Master. This has the most clarity and the least amount of excessive noise reduction, but of course that's for the preview version of the film. When you look at the theatrical cut, all you have is the VHS hi-fi track to really compare with. I was able to find this copy, which is a hard tape to get, and it does have some wear and some dropouts, but it sounds really nice for the time in which it was made. The theatrical audio on the Criterion is obviously coming from the same source. It doesn't have any of the dropout issues from it being a tape made in, say, 1983, but you can tell comparing the two that it has had some work done and some noise reduction. It still sounds good and solid, but I think they went maybe just a little bit heavy-handed in places, and most of all, this always comes through in the music and sound effects in terms of how it was mixed. Now, for the 50th anniversary cut, this is a revision of the 2005 cut. The sound mix was completely redone in terms of the editing, so it doesn't have any any of the bad sound problems and edit problems of the 2005 sound mix, thank goodness. Also, they have not done a Atmos remix or something crazy in a multi-channel remix, and it's still mono, so at least it somewhat replicates the original experience. But it's been hit with additional degrees of noise reduction, so of the audio tracks in this particular Criterion release, I think it actually is the least sounding. Again, it's nothing that's ever heavy-handed, but when you put all of these tracks side by side, and the best version is still by far the MGM UA letterbox Laserdisc of the 1988 version in terms of the Turner master of the first preview cut, I have issues because this was from a worn element. It's got defects in the actual source it transferred, but it left things pretty much alone. And especially for the music and sound effects, it sounds so much clearer. It has more high end. Whereas when you go all the way to the 50th anniversary release, they try to throw more into the low end, and it's been EQ'd a bit differently, and it's had noise reduction applied. So when you get into the weeds of this, you can start to find issues. At the end of the day, all of the mono presentations on this Criterion release sound good for what they are. They've all been worked on some too much, and frankly, all of them sound inferior to the MGM UA Laserdisc, regardless of which cut you prefer. And regardless of that Laserdisc coming from an element with baked-in issues that they couldn't do anything about. So, frankly, the audio track needs a complete restoration for all the cuts without excessive processing, and it really hasn't gotten that. Now to talk about the overall packaging and artwork, we have a deluxe Criterion box with a slip-out digipack. This is done in the usual Criterion style, so the back is what you expect, and they've gone for a sort of burnt orange color overall to sort of symbolize, I guess, the themes of the desert and depression and failure. And we, of course, have the motif of the shattered mirror, making a nice cover that, of course, pulls directly from the iconic image from the end of the film when Garrett is staring into the shattered mirror, essentially reflecting portions of his own shattered psyche and what semblance of a soul he may claim to still have. So it's honestly a great cover from Criterion. It's not super arty as some of their covers do. It's also not the original poster artwork, which I would have preferred, as we saw on the Warner DVD and even the original VHS tape. And I think even the MGM Laserdisc for just using stills looks really nice across a Laserdisc jacket. But this is still really good artwork. I just probably would have preferred just having the original poster with the rendering of Coburn on it. But still, this is really nice artwork. We, of course, slide out the digipack. We open to find a nice image on the digipack of Kris Kristofferson and James Coburn, given the same sort of burnt, sunlit orange effect. And, of course, it's just a simple digipack, so the booklet is just tucked inside. And like a lot of Criterion releases, when they do stuff like this, we just have the discs in cases, and the actual background of the digipack is just blank. Also, when you have this without the booklet inside, the actual trays just kind of clash together as the booklet helps to make it more sturdy. So it does have that sort of cheap, flimsy effect that we expect from Criterion digipacks. The actual booklet with a pretty nice essay is unfortunately a fold-out affair. Criterion still does this and only does stapled booklets every once in a while. For a set like this, you would think they would have done a stapled booklet. I mean, I'm pretty much used to these by now, but with everybody else kind of abandoning this practice, I wish Criterion would get with the times and just always do stapled booklets, because these are still just really unwieldy. The images are good, but as usual, when you get to the actual transfer notes, which of course are very important for this release, the text is rather small and it's kind of hard to read the white text on a colored background. The essay is by Steve Erickson and is actually quite a nice essay. I did enjoy reading this. It didn't really have any material that was new to me, but it is substantial enough and does show a deep respect for the film, although it does seem to really prefer the new 50th anniversary cut, which I can't agree with. But in terms of Criterion essays, I think this is a solid essay. It's a very good essay for the film. It's just you got to read it in this fashion because it's a fold-out booklet. So again, inside we have the 2 UHD discs on the left. So disc 1 is the new version 2 recut. Disc 2 is the UHD of the 1973 Theatrical Cut. Disc 3 is the Blu-ray of both of the cuts from the new 4K masters. So they are branched onto the same disc, and that means also their bit rate and encoding suffers. But that also pours further salt in the wound because it shows how both of the preview cuts could have been included on a single disc properly branched. And then the last disc is the disc with the raw print scan of the final preview version, and the Blu-rays have supplements scattered throughout where the UHDs merely have the commentary tracks. Then underneath the disc we have at least some nice images from Garrett confronting Billy the Kid when he is first captured and given the same sort of orange tint. Apologies for the glare. It's hard to do when these are plastic and you're just holding it up. So there's at least some imagery and it's given the same sort of aesthetic, but you have to remove the disc and there's nothing on the background. So it would have been better had they extended the image for the actual spine of the case. And here's how the case looks when you put the discs in order with the only disc that matters as the proper disc 1 placement. To go over the supplemental features of this release, of course we have the new 4K restoration of only the 50th anniversary cut and the theatrical cut. There is a new audio commentary for the 50th anniversary cut with Paul Seydor, Roger Spottiswoode, and critic Michael Sfragrau. Apologies if I mispronounced that. Again, this is a brand new commentary track, and it's a bit confusing because the 2005 DVD had a Seydor-led commentary for that specific release. So this is a different commentary. You're probably, if you're like me, you're coming to this hoping to hear a lot from Roger Spottiswoode, but he's just kind of there. He doesn't say a whole lot. But it's basically Seydor kind of doubling down on why he made certain edits in his 50th anniversary cut and how this is basically fixing the issues of his first go-round with the 2005 cut. It's an okay commentary. It's not filled with a ton of insight, and I think there's actually more insight about the film in the 2005 commentary, so it's really kind of baffling and a shame that that was not included here as well. So that's a commentary locked exclusively to the Warner DVD, but at least we have a solid new commentary, which is the only real thing you get in this release that explains why some decisions were made in the new 50th anniversary version, such as the, frankly, in my opinion, idiotic decision to cut any of the footage of Sam Peckinpah's cameo in the film, as he essentially plays a character that's a Greek chorus for the film. Yeah, it might go on a little long, but I treasure every frame of that. Then we go on with the extras, which it seems like it's quite a lot, but it's actually not all that much when you actually watch through them. Infuriatingly, we get the credit that says, new 2K digital master of director Sam Peckinpah's final preview cut with uncompressed monaural soundtrack. That's basically misleading the consumer and acting like they have restored the final preview cut, and then you actually get to that disc and you find out to your horror that it's merely a raw print scan. So yeah, they should have made that clear on this, but they did not. The primary new Criterion produced extra is of course focusing on Dylan's soundtrack because that's the thing most everybody focuses on. It's entitled Dylan in Durango, a new interview with author Clinton Halen about the film's soundtrack. It's another of Criterion's usual on-camera talking head interviews, cut with clips from the film. It does provide a lot of great background about Dylan's career and personal life at the time, his introduction to the actual film, getting hired by Peckinpah, the composition and struggles recording the score, how he didn't get on with Peckinpah's usual composer Jerry Fielding, and the overall reception and legacy of the score. So it's really helpful for understanding the score's impact and its composition, and again, where it takes place in terms of Dylan's overall career, which was sort of at a crossroads in ways. My only issue here with this is, of course, as usual, the compression of the actual interview portions is not the greatest, so the person on camera is kind of talking in front of a wall of noise behind them. But also, I do take a little bit of issue because the interviewee is obviously a big Dylan fan, and Dylan and Jerry Fielding did not get along all that much, and so usually Dylan fans kind of badmouth Jerry Fielding a little bit, and it does kind of come across a little bit that way in this interview, which I didn't appreciate because Jerry Fielding is one of the great underrated composers and one of the key people in the overall Peckinpah canon, and it would be interesting to know what Fielding would have done with this film had he been able to actually work with Dylan and seen what Dylan was going for. So it was just basically two heads kind of butting together and somebody just deciding to leave the project, which is understandable, but it would be helpful if the actual discussion of Fielding's involvement was a little bit more detailed. The best of the supplements is, of course, a new Mike Siegel documentary, who's probably the world's primary Peckinpah historian and also documentarian, and has his long-running, ever-updating Passion and Poetry documentary series on Peckinpah. So this is basically a 49-minute, so almost hour-long documentary specifically on Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and is using elements and interviews he's compiled over the years and also updating it with new materials, new images, new production stills and things, all in HD. So it's just a wonderful treasure every time some of his material or documentaries pops up on a release, especially when it's like this, and it's him getting to go back and basically do a new extended version with new materials. So it is, again, filled with archival interviews and priceless pieces, and extraordinarily well done, as all of his materials are. So anytime you see Mike Siegel pop up, especially on a Peckinpah release, you know that extra is worth its weight in gold, and that goes for this, as it runs almost an entire hour. Then we get an archival interview with James Coburn, which was actually done for the Z channel in the 1980s, around the time that the first preview version was getting shown on that channel and rediscovered, and then MGM came out with their Video Master shortly thereafter. It's a wonderfully candid interview. Coburn is always unbelievably charming and probably the coolest man who ever lived, just naturally. So for us Coburn fans, it's just a treasure. Unfortunately, the quality is very low. It's seemingly sourced from an old VHS copy, and there are dropouts and damage, and it's just great to have, but it's obviously a sit-down interview for a then more local, smaller channel outlet, I guess, interview with a film critic. But it's nice, and Coburn gets into detail about some of his other films and his career overall and where he kind of is at that point in the late 80s, early 90s. So it's really nice to have. The quality is what it is, but it is a great inclusion. Then we have the original trailer and TV spots for the film. The original trailer is unfortunately a standard definition upscale in the 1.78 ratio, and it doesn't look all that great. It's a worn source, and the color's not all the greatest, but it is unfortunately an upscale and not an HD. The TV spots are, of course, very short and to the point, but it's a cool inclusion. They are unfortunately not in the greatest quality either, although it's nice that the second, shorter TV spot is like a super hyped up trailer edit, and actually is probably the best of the trailers included here. But unfortunately, none of the trailers and TV spots are really transferred in high quality, but at least they are included here to give you some impression of how MGM tried to sell their compromised version on the theatrical release. And I think you can also tell why the film didn't do all that well, because the marketing is not very good. So that's it for the supplements. And as I alluded to, even though this is a 4-disc set with a big list on the back, when you actually sit down and look at these supplements themselves, there's not all that much in terms of new supplements, or the overall package is not all that much. And then you jump back to the Warner 2005 DVD and start looking at everything that was left off and is still locked exclusive to this DVD. And most copies of this DVD unfortunately suffered disc rot, so you won't even be able to view these extras. There was, of course, the 2005 commentary I mentioned for that cut with Nick Redman, Paul Seydor, Garner Simmons, and David Weddle, basically getting the whole group of Peckinpah scholars together. And I think this is a more insightful commentary track, far more than the new Criterion track. Then for Disc 2, which is labeled the 1988 Turner Preview version, using the Laserdisc master essentially, there was a second commentary, equally insightful, again with Nick Redman, Paul Seydor, Garner Simmons, and David Weddle. So that's an entirely second commentary that's exclusive to this. So this has 2 feature-length commentaries you can't get on the Criterion release. Then we had 2 new featurettes, one deconstructing Pat and Billy, focusing on the sort of production and aftermath of the film that was well made and well put together. Then we have One Foot in the Grave, Remembering Sam Peckinpah and Other Things, which is another featurette documentary about the film and Peckinpah in particular. And then, especially prescient now, as he unfortunately passed away this year, there's 2 songs performed by Chris Christopherson for this DVD release. And of course, one of them is literally Sam's song that he wrote about Peckinpah. So not only is Christopherson interviewed in the featurettes on this release and participated in the extras, he even performed 2 songs acoustically for this DVD supplement, and that's a really nice, priceless gift to have on here. So this is a really important DVD to still have. The supplements on here are quite substantial, including 2 feature-length audio commentaries. None of this is ported to the Criterion release. There is no reason, seemingly, why they couldn't have included it, as they're getting the film rights from Warner anyway, and all the video extras are standard definition. They wouldn't have taken any room to put on one of the Blu-ray discs, really. So you definitely have to hang on to this. This is the most important of the Peckinpah DVDs for the supplements that are exclusive, the 2 audio commentaries that are better than the one on the Criterion release, and most of all, having any version of the first preview version. Just be sure to check your copies, because if you're like me, your discs are probably rotted, and then you have to go buy another copy or source it from somewhere else and continue to play the rot lottery with a second copy. So overall, the Criterion Collection 4K UHD and Blu-ray combo format release of Sam Peckinpah's 1973 Pat, Garrett, and Billy the Kid, a masterpiece that was never fully completed, that in some ways is just as impactful, if not even more special in a way, in its unfinished, not fully polished preview versions, which are the only iterations of the proper film that survive, has been severely, I think, insulted by this presentation, not actually attempting to do anything with restoring either of the 2 preview cuts, and only giving us a raw print scan of the final preview cut, and completely ignoring the first preview cut that most of us grew up watching and contains unique elements not found in the second preview version or any version presented in this set. Furthermore, they have given precedence and full attention to a second version of a critic's re-edit of the film, which thankfully fixes issues from the first critic edit of the film that most of us fans have extreme problems with. But also, they have given precedence to MGM's 1973 theatrical release version, which was the furthest from the original vision of Peckinpah as referenced in the 2 preview cuts, and both of those iterations have been given 4K UHDs with brand new 4K masters, Dolby Vision, and all the preferential treatment. They will now be the versions in circulation because they have the new masters. They're the ones being advertised. They're the ones that are going to be on streaming services, and they're the ones that people are going to put in when they get this release because they're the 4K masters, and people who don't know about the film will obviously be led to believe that they are better or the best representation of the film, which they are certainly not. I have no real words to fully convey my amazement, my puzzlement, and quite frankly, my fury for how Criterion has disrespected one of the great works from one of the great American directors. So I would like to quote from Criterion's mission statement, which is on their website, and frankly, I find not applicable to their releases that are frequently without the utmost technical quality, specifically in audio overprocessing and bad encoding. But I quote, "Since 1984, the Criterion Collection has been dedicated to publishing important classic and contemporary films from around the world in editions that offer the highest technical quality and award-winning original supplements. No matter the medium, from Laserdisc to DVD, Blu-ray, 4K Ultra HD to streaming, Criterion has maintained its pioneering commitment to presenting each film as its maker would want it seen in state-of-the-art restorations with special features designed to encourage repeated watching and deepen the viewer's appreciation of the art of film." Now, I stress certain words there because this release certainly doesn't do those, just for how it has treated the only surviving versions of the director's vision, which are only found in the 2 preview versions of the film. Those should have been Disc 1 seamlessly branched with both preview cuts using the new 4K master as a base, and then Disc 2 be a Blu-ray with those two versions branched, and both discs should have had a maxed out bitrate with proper disc encoding. Everything else in this release could have been the same. That is the major issue here. We have a release that claims to be a restoration of the film, and it really isn't, because they didn't complete the job. And thus they have not only doubled down, but continued the film's legacy of being kicked around. And in some ways, I think Sam Peckinpah obviously would have found that kind of funny, probably as he was in a room somewhere still drinking, and it makes us fans kind of feel a little bit that way, as a film that we all consider a masterpiece can never have its preview versions at least presented in a modern master of the best quality that can be generated. And what makes all of this just unbelievably, deeply, deeply insulting is that you can see how they could have done it. I mean, I can do it myself, and that's what I'm going to have to do. You have to take the 4K master, you have to rip it from the disc, you have to put it into editing software, and then you make captures of the Laserdisc to get the audio track to sync it to the 1988 version on the DVD, and then use that with the 4K master to reconstruct the first preview version on your own, and have to jump back and forth between the 4K master and standard definition that you're going to have to upscale, and have to worry about syncing the whole audio track all over again to your final version. And then you have to do the same sort of process to recreate the second preview version, where you're having to mix and match between the new 4K master, the Laserdisc audio because it is superior to what we have on the Criterion release, and the version of the second preview cut from the raw print scan. So you have to jump back and forth cutting between the 4K master and the raw preview scan, and trying to address its issues as best as you can on your own, and basically do your own fan restoration. This is the type of stuff that a lot of us fans have done over the years before this release, trying to take elements of the 2005 DVD release and make a better version of the preview version, and that's limited because we only have certain elements. But essentially, fans shouldn't have to try to do the preservation work themselves, especially if someone is going to act as if they have properly restored a film. Whether they had access to the first preview version or not, at the very least, there should be a UHD with a version of the second preview version that goes between their new 4K master of the theatrical cut and the print scan they had to do. Yes, it would be a bit jarring to jump back and forth, but that's what you have to do in a restoration, and other labels do it all the time. Other studios do it all the time. All you need is a little bit of explanatory text. And there should have been some sort of new extra, at least I think, talking about the different versions, talking about the restoration in particular, explaining this to people so they wouldn't have to dig around the internet or ask on forums, and also explaining Criterion's rationale if they were just going to only include one version of the director's cut, and it was only the raw print scan of the second preview version, which itself is different to the first preview version. In short, and very ironically, but sort of fitting in a way, the film is still without a definitive proper release in regards to Peckinpah's actual vision, as seen in the preview cuts. They only exist in a variety of video masters now made from rough as-is transfers of surviving elements with tons of baked-in damage that were not meant to be really publicly screened, and they have deteriorated further in this time. It's even theorized that the first preview cut may have completely deteriorated since the 1988 mastering and then the 2005 DVD. If that was the case, it should have at least been disclosed. That's why it wasn't included here, but nothing has been said officially, so that's merely a fan theory. But for Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid to only exist in a Peckinpah version as a raw print scan of a worn work print with tons of element issues as a backup feature on a backup Blu-ray disc only in a UHD set that's claiming to be a 50th anniversary restoration of the film, that just once again underlines the tragic tale and history of this film, and how it's always been kicked around for decades, ever since it was, before it was even released, it of course was kicked around by a vengeful studio. So it's ironically fitting in a way that the only way to see a version of Peckinpah's vision of one of his absolute masterpieces, and what I think is quite possibly the saddest American film ever made, it fits in a strange sort of way. It fits the film's tone of being about endless seas of regret and realizing that human existence is futile, and one carries nothing but regret and memory of regret, and alcohol can only submerge or put some of that at bay for a select period of time, but it's always there, like as Ian Fleming would have put it, as a death watch beetle in the soul. So it's sadly ironic that the preview cut presentation is only a raw print scan of a degraded lone print element, and only one of the preview cuts treated merely as a bonus tacked on in one of the supplemental discs. So those are my thoughts overall on the Criterion UHD and Blu-ray combo format release of Sam Peckinpah's masterpiece Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. I am extraordinarily disappointed in Criterion for their handling of this release. I think it is absolutely reprehensible that they did not restore either of the two preview cuts, even though it would have to be an as best as possible job. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that they have now essentially not only continued but doubled down on both MGM disrespecting the film on the theatrical release, and then Warner disrespecting the film in the DVD era by pretending that the 2005 Critics Cut was a director's cut and making that the standard version of the film when it was also filled with color timing problems and sound errors. So I have many, many issues with this release. Otherwise, it is the usual sort of Criterion standard of combo format release that's made, well enough and has nice packaging and nice artwork and a solid booklet essay and thankfully solid disc encoding. And the actual new 4K master itself is good, and I just wish the audio hadn't been processed on all of the tracks. The new supplements are good, although I don't feel there's quite enough for a big box set of one of Sam Peckinpah's greatest works, and not including any of the Warner DVD extras is a major oversight because there are crucial pieces there, plus 2 entire audio commentaries, and this is all locked to a Warner DVD that is a DVD rotter, so most of our copies are, if they're not completely unplayable, will be very much unplayable very soon. So it would be really important to resurrect those very good DVD extras, which they very easily could have done and apparently chose not to. But again, I come back to how the preview version has been treated, and there's not any presentation of the first preview version, and all the audio presentations of the cuts on this disc are not as good as the original Laserdisc presentation of the first preview version in PCM mono, and that was from a degraded source already, so that in and of itself is unforgivable. But how the director's vision has been treated on this release, and giving preference to a second version of the 2005 Critics Cut and the MGM theatrical release version, is just unforgivable, unbelievable, and absolutely ridiculous. For me, this is the greatest blunder Criterion has ever made, as it disrespects not only fans of the film and fans of Peckinpah's work, but it insults the work itself and Sam Peckinpah's vision in what is one of his most personal films and one of his most distinctly unique films that I think is also unique within all of American cinema. So for that, I have to only recommend this release with the greatest of reservations and encourage people to watch the Blu-ray disc with the raw print scan of the second preview cut first, as that is the only version in this set that is Sam Peckinpah's vision in any way, shape, or form. As far as I'm concerned, in this release, that is the only disc that matters. You can basically use the UHDs as coasters because they are not the director's vision, nor are they the film as properly intended, and one of them is the butchered theatrical release edit that really didn't help the film get a good reputation when it came out and failed at the box office. So it really pours salt into the wound and furthers the never-ending saga that surrounds this film, and how, like a lot of Peckinpah titles, it is quite frankly cursed. And it's baffling to think that Criterion couldn't get this right when Arrow Video did a deluxe presentation of Major Dundee, which is another Peckinpah masterpiece that was never fully finished and does have an extended version. And they did a fantastic job of presenting the two cuts and ensuring to fix the problem of the extended cut not being given the original mono mix and score on the first Twilight Time Blu-ray release, which astoundingly thought the original mono mix wasn't important to have on the extended Sony restoration of the film. So it's, I think, a night and day example comparing the wonderful work of the Arrow team on the Major Dundee release, which is only a Blu-ray release, and the work of the Criterion team here on Pat Garrett in this UHD Blu-ray combo, which does not respect the film or Peckinpah's vision in the way that Arrow did on Major Dundee. So as always, I hope my babblings about the works of Sam Peckinpah, the truly great masterpieces, and home video releases has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I hate to be so negative, but I'm really having to compose myself here because I've been infuriated with this since I got it and I realized what Criterion had done. And when I actually sat down and watched the preview version presentation, while it was thankfully better than what I thought it was going to be, it was still frankly unforgivable to present only one version of one of the great director's visions of one of his masterpieces that was unfortunately never fully 100% finished, and only presented in this level of quality is very close to a raw print scan. And having to pay top dollar to also get UHDs of two other versions that are being treated as better and more appropriate and giving the full technical top-of-the-line treatment with Dolby Vision and 4K masters and UHD discs, basically repeating the mistakes Warner Video made with the 2005 DVD and the 2005 recut. So that, and also not porting any of the Warner DVDs, not having any version of the first preview version, and all of that topped off with all of the audio tracks of the different cuts having, quite frankly, too much audio processing and EQ applied, makes this a really contentious release for me, a release that I think will infuriate all Peckinpah fans who have already been talking about this since it came out. But I wanted to do further digging with past releases, and so I tracked down the 1983 VHS release of the Theatrical Cut. I dusted off my Laserdisc copy. I managed to get another copy of the 2005 Warner DVD that didn't have disc rot on both discs, so it took a little while, but I wanted to make sure and cover every aspect of this release just to make sure that I wasn't overlooking something. But I keep coming back to the fact that it seems very much like Criterion couldn't be bothered to actually do any sort of restoration for the actual director's vision of the film in either of the two preview cuts that survive. So for that reason, I think this is quite possibly Criterion's worst ever disc release. Not necessarily on a technical level, not for some technical problem, but for a problem of not actually restoring the director's vision of a film. And they could have done either of the preview cuts. And on top of that, they didn't include a form of both of them because both of the preview cuts have differences. They're not the same. It boggles the mind. And they could have included the Warner DVD extras to get them off of a rotting DVD. And some of those have priceless pieces with, people who are no longer with us. And it would have helped to bolster the supplemental features package, which I think is actually quite a bit lacking in terms of the overall amount of content. So I just have a lot of problems with this. I'm really disappointed in Criterion. This goes way beyond their usual technical issues of bad disc on codes and overprocessing audio. This gets into actually disrespecting one of the great American films from one of the great American directors, a film that has been kicked around its entire life and still needs a proper restoration of what we have of the director's vision of the film in either of the two preview cuts, both of which need to be restored and presented to make a definitive release of what we have of, frankly, one of the great American films, Sam Peckinpah's masterpiece, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. So as always, please do keep supporting both boutique labels and studio labels by buying films on disc, even when it's a compromised as hell release like this from Criterion. Because in purchasing films on physical media, you not only ensure the survival of physical media and disc formats, but also the survival of film culture itself. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. You're in poor company, Criterion. Yeah, I'm alive, though. So am I. Now I want you to go over there to that shelf of press releases and give us a nice read, loud enough for us all to hear. Sam Peckinpah's cycle of genre-redefining westerns came to a close with his blood-and-dust-caked elegy for the American West, which mirrors his renegade style with a fatalistic sense of finality. Presented here for the first time in 3 separate versions, stands as perhaps the maverick auteur's richest, most mature work, a world-weary ballad that bears the solemn weight of history passing into legend. New 4K digital restoration of the 50th anniversary release and the original theatrical release, and only a 2K raw digital master of the final preview cut with no sign of the first preview cut, and over-processed audio tracks on every version. The final preview cut represents the last version of the film on which Peckinpah worked directly. This 2K master was created from a print from the collection of the Academy Film Archive. Unrestored and minimally color-corrected, this presentation is intended to convey the feeling of watching the raw, rough-edged, and unfinished film. The 50th anniversary release and original theatrical release are presented in Dolby Vision HDR on the 4K Ultra HD disc. The final preview cut is presented in high-definition SDR. You finally figured it out, huh? Go on, get it over with. When are you gonna learn that you can't trust anybody? Even yourself, Criterion. You overconfident logo-wearing son of a bitch.
What you want and what you get are 2 different things.
Mama, take this UHD off me. I can't watch it anymore. It's getting revisionist, too revisionist to see. Feel like I'm knocking on Criterion's door. Knock, knock, 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 knocking on Criterion's door. Mama put my discs in the ground. I can't play them anymore. That Warner disc rot has taken more. Feel like I'm knocking on Criterion's door. Knock, knock, 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 knocking on Criterion's door. Ooh.